This is a question to David Coleman. Your party's leader infamously walked out of the Parliament during the apology to Indigenous peoples in 2008. And currently the Federal Liberal Party seems to be deliberately playing a dead hand when it comes to the vote to the voice to Parliament. Now, it might seem like this is a clever strategy in the party room, David, but to the rest of us out here in the real world, we see it for what it is. It's just a lack of moral courage and a willingness to play political games at the expense of our nation. And the question I have for you is, when would you and your colleagues realise that there are some issues so important to our nation that doing nothing is never an option?
Look, thank you for your question, and obviously I completely reject the premise of the question. So here's the situation. So we have a proposal from the government for the voice. Now, what we've said as an opposition is we've got a whole series of questions about that, and we'd like them to be answered. And what the government's basically saying is they're not going to be answered. And frankly, the government's effectively saying you shouldn't be asking because we'll deal with that later. Now, that's one approach. That's the government's approach. I think it's completely wrong. And to be frank, I think it is disrespectful to the Australian community to be unwilling to engage in a sensible, mature and calm discussion about the details of the voice. Why should the opposition, or for that matter any Australian, not be allowed to ask questions about the voice? The Prime Minister said in Parliament the other day...
I don't think there's any shortage of questions.
Well, no,
Peter Dutton's had access to the advisory committees. He's had access to all of the reports. He's asking a lot of questions.
Well, and so he should stand, because it's not a trivial thing to change the Constitution. We've done it 8 times in 122 years. And Mr Dutton, absolutely appropriately, is asking questions about, well, how's it going to work? How's this body going to be elected? And so on. And the Prime Minister in Parliament a few weeks ago said words to the effect of, you know, have a heart, support the voice, words to that effect, I'm paraphrasing, which effectively implies that if one doesn't support the voice or is asking questions about the voice, that person doesn't have a heart. And that is absurd, because we all want the best for Indigenous Australians. We all acknowledge that there's been things in our history that have been terrible towards Indigenous Australians. But to presuppose that unless you adopt the exact methodology of the Prime Minister in relation to the voice, that you are morally inferior simply for asking questions, I think it's completely wrong. I don't think the mainstream Australian community is going to accept that approach, and I think that Mr Dutton is absolutely right to be asking the questions that he's asking.
I think it's not an issue of having a heart, it's an issue of having a ticker. And I think the Australian public and First Nations people in this country are being disrespected the longer the Liberal Party hold out on declaring their hand on the voice. It's one thing for Peter Dutton to come out and apologise for not being there for the national apology because he recognised that he was on the wrong side of history at that time. What is he going to say the day after the referendum when the Australian public overwhelmingly support First Nations people wanting to have a voice in Parliament?
Where do you sit, David? Do you support the voice or not?
Look, I support the position that we've adopted as a shadow cabinet, which is to
But others in your party, Andrew Bragg has supported it, Julian Leeser has supported, others have come out and said that they support it.
Like many of us in our party, I want to hear more answers from the government, and I think we'll go through that process. I don't think that it should be a case that this must be resolved tomorrow. I think it is more important...
Well, it's not being resolved tomorrow. The date hasn't been set for the referendum. It's going to be months and months away. The campaigns haven't even started yet.
Sure. It's a rhetorical... I just mean quickly. I think that what should happen is that there should be a sensible, well-informed, orderly discussion. I think that Mr Albanese should address each of the questions that Mr Dutton has asked, and people can then form their view. And I just don't... I find it very odd that the argument is that Mr Dutton should not be asking questions.
The questions are a diversionary tactic.
No, they're not.
To stall for time.
No, they're not.
Until Peter Dutton can see that it's a popular thing in Australia.
So
He's playing politics with the voice to Parliament. He's playing politics with the voice to Parliament. It is an in-principle question that's being posed to the people, which will then be determined, the detail will be determined by parliamentarians in legislation that will follow this in-principle support of a voice to Parliament. What Peter Dutton is doing is stalling for time to see whether it is popular amongst the people. We know that it's popular amongst Australians. He needs to stand for something and be on the right side of history, and so he can be judged accordingly. It's like some people in politics are enjoying the drama of it. You know, they want the politics of it. It is like watching a very bad heteronormative rom-com where there is the tension. You know, there's one side saying, this is good for us. The other side saying, but I don't know you very well. And then, but the thing is that the Liberal Party started this. Noel Pearson said this today. The Liberal Party started this. The Howard government started this. The Malcolm Fraser government started this. In the late 70s, some of us remember the road to Makarrata even then. This is not something that the Liberal Party should not be taking ownership of. The Liberal Party started this. Finish what you started.